Well, welcome. I'm so happy that some of you could all come on and join today to remember Robert. What a wonderful, interesting, complex character he was. So hold on, I'm just going to put this in gallery view so I can see your faces. So I was really pleased when Angela asked me to do this, and my first response actually was, I don't know, I have to think about that. Robert was actually a pretty, I don't know, I just saw Robert's face being sort of like, what? You know, but then I realized, well, you know what, he's not here. I get to make the choice now. And so I'm just really happy to be remembering him. And it's been wonderful preparing for this, because I've really picked up his book again, and I really have had a chance to revisit just what an amazing person Robert was. And I can say I was married to Robert for 21 years, and he was 18 years older than me. And I think that I was quite young. I was in my 20s when we got together. And I think that I really didn't really grok all of who Robert was until after he passed. And I remember at his memorial in Berkeley, I remember saying, I think I'm going to be processing my relationship with Robert for the rest of my life. So here I am 9 years post his death, and I'm still really coming to appreciate the amazing being that he was. Robert spent much of his life being ill. He started getting ill when he was 18 months old. He had his first major asthma attack, and he was in and out of hospitals most of his childhood, and really didn't live a regular childhood, because in those days, asthma was, you know, they thought that you shouldn't do anything when you have asthma. So he was mostly confined to his room. And as a result, he built a very rich inner life. He read a lot, and so his love of books stayed with him for his whole life. But that, you know, battling that illness as a child, I think really helped develop the character of resistance and fortitude that he had, and determination. I mean, Robert battled illnesses his whole life. Not only did he have asthma, but then he developed Crohn's disease. And then in his 50s, he also had Parkinson's. So it was a life of, you know, his spirituality and his health were intertwined. As he writes in the epilogue of his book, he writes about that really beautifully. But Robert had the art of denial down to you know, he had perfected the art of denial. And in many ways, it's what got him through. Although it wreaked a lot of havoc in his personal life, it was really the thing that developed the character and the determination that was needed for him to actually reach the feet of his beloved. And for many people who took care of Robert or helped with his illnesses in later life can attest to how stubborn he was. When he set his mind to doing something, even toward the end of his life, when he could barely walk, he was planning trips to India and wound up actually being taken off an airplane in London because he was so sick. But nobody could stop him. That was who Robert was. So as I said, it was a double-edged sword in his life, because he was, you know, he was determined to overcome and not have anything limit him. So what I think I'm going to do is, and Robert had a very full life. For all the illnesses this man had, he lived a more full life than probably most people. I mean, not only did he meet Meher Baba, but he went on to do many years of drug work for Baba. And he also then became an acupuncturist. He got married twice, actually, in his life, and had 2 children. And even went on traveling later in his life. He took his final spiritual journey to Tibet to trek around Mount Kailash. Even though he wasn't really well enough to do that, he did it. So that was the man that Robert was. So I think today what I'd really like to do is talk a little bit about his story. I mean, I know many of you have probably heard Robert's story, and if you haven't, I think it's really worth hearing it in his own words. But I will paraphrase some of it, and I'm going to do a little bit of sharing my memories of the story, as well as reading a little bit of his words. And then I want to leave time for questions and sharing. And I think Bob Aarons, who's on the call today, is going to read a little bit of Robert's poetry, because Robert was a really amazing poet too. So I want to start with just, when I opened his book, I hadn't looked at it in a couple of years. And when I opened his book, to the first chapter is entitled Without Breath. And I thought, isn't that interesting how here we are in the year of 2020, where breathing and breath has become such an issue. And so it just immediately touched me. That's why I felt like I had to read it, because for Robert, breath was something that was sacred in his whole life. So the first two paragraphs of his book start with, "Without breath, we are dead. The most primal activity, of which we remain unaware unless it is compromised, determines the quality of our lives. Its absence is our undoing. As a child, I was extremely limited physically, spending 2 years from age 8 to 10 at the National Jewish Home for Asthmatic Children in Denver, Colorado, 2,000 miles from my family in Boston. I learned that I was not alone in my suffering. It was also clear to me that over time, I could either experience an early death or I could struggle to overcome these health obstacles." And that is what set the tone of Robert's life, because he made the choice to overcome the obstacles, come hell or high water. So as Robert's journey goes on, he had many adventures that led him to Boston University in Boston. And in 1965, well, actually 1964, he heard about Meher Baba and started reading extensively about Baba. And then in 1965, actually decided to take a journey to see Meher Baba, because at that point, he really felt like he was convinced that Baba was the Christ. And therefore, what else could he do but make that journey? So in 1965, the summer of 1965, Baba had sent a circular saying that he was going to be giving a sahavas in December of 1965. And Robert felt that this was his opportunity and he was going to go. So he had heard from Rick Chapman and others that they were going to be chartering planes to fly, and it was going to cost $600, and they got to stay 10 days, and they were going to go to the sahavas. And Robert, as he used to joke, being Jewish, he said that his Judaism actually helped him there, because he was like, I'm not spending $600 to go for 10 days to India. Are you kidding me? So he decided he could take that $600 and spend 3 years in India. So he set off on a journey on September 1st to hitchhike overland to get to India early and help out with preparations and, go to the sahavas to see Baba. So Robert, being the trailblazer that he was, actually, he paid to his flight to London, and he gets to London, and from London to India, he travels overland. And Robert's story, to me, actually, is a metaphor for a generation of spiritual seekers. I think that his story is so laden with so many of what the spiritual path is really all about. And as Baba had told him at the end of his journey there, well, through Mani, she said that Baba had said that he was with Robert all the way. So I think his story has a lot of significance to all of us on the spiritual journey. But anyway, so Robert left on September 1st, and nobody could reach him. So he gets to London and he starts to make his way overland. And the story from his getting from London even to Kuwait. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give some highlights of the story, because I don't want to take all the time to tell it now, and because I want to hear from all of you as well. But some of the highlights of the story are when he gets to Kuwait, he's held up in Kuwait for 2 weeks waiting for a ship to take him to Bombay. Now, at this point, he's had so many adventures and so much time of hard travel, and he has to wait there in Kuwait, where hashish and pot were plentiful. So he spends a lot of time waiting to board the ship to see Baba smoking and trying to read his spiritual books that he had with him. So a highlight of the trip, once he gets on the ship, he's traveling deck class. And once he gets on the ship, he's in the middle of nowhere with the stars everywhere in the middle of the ocean. And he has this epiphany of realizing what Robert called the seesaw of hypocrisy. Is he's traveling between these two worlds of his drug addictions and his spiritual longings. And so he has this epiphany, and I'm just going to read a little bit of his words here about how when he's on the boat, he realizes that he's smoking because that's what you did in the 60s. And in his knapsack, he's loaded with God Speaks, the Everything in the Nothing, the Discourses, the Bhagavad Gita. And through his drug-induced mist, I was struggling to read them. And each time, it was like having a hammer in my head. I began to feel as though I were riding a seesaw of hypocrisy. On one side were my good intentions, my spiritual inclinations, my desire for truth, and the holy books I brought with me. And on the other side were the drugs, my nasty habits, and my patterns of behavior. I was getting sick of this constant back and forth, and it was obvious to me from the readings I had done that no one had said drugs were the way to truth. They'd been around forever, these books, and I thought if somebody would have certainly picked up on that idea by now, if it were true. So Robert wakes up the morning after that night, and he throws all his drugs over the side of the boat. And by the time he gets to India, except for one dose of pharmaceutical LSD that he tucked in his backpack thinking, well, after he meets Baba and the Sahavas, he's going to go up to the Himalayas and bring it in colorfully. That was his thing. So that LSD is in his backpack. So he gets to Bombay. By the time he gets to Bombay, he's completely on fire to meet Baba. The urge is getting stronger. He gives up all his desires to go travel around India, and he goes straight to Pune. And one wonderful little snippet was when he gets to the station road on the way to Pune, and he's hitchhiking. He puts out his thumb to get to Pune from Bombay, and this big truck pulls up, and the guys in the truck cab point to the top to get on. So he climbs up to the top of this truck, which is laden with furniture that's all covered with with tarps. And the only thing that's available is a giant oversized stuffed chair. And so he climbs into this chair and he sits in this chair and he rides through the Ghats all the way to Pune. It's like most comfortable transportation he'd had the whole time. So it's like Baba's rolling out the red carpet. So he gets to Pune, he makes his way through a lot of other adventures to finally get to the Pune Center, which is where the first time he hears that Baba has canceled the Sahavas. Now, Baba sent the circular canceling the Sahavas on September 4th. Robert left September 1st, don't forget. So nobody knew where Robert was. There was no internet in those days. So he gets to the Pune Center and he's on fire. He's like, K.K. Ramakrishna was the first person he meets. And he sees this dusty hippie come in, Westerner, and he's like, can I help you? And he says, yes, I am here early. I know I'm early, but I'm here to help and volunteer for the Sahavas, to help out. And K.K. Ramakrishna is quite shocked. And he's like, but excuse me, he said, Baba has canceled the Sahavas. And Robert is like, you must be joking. I've come all this way. And so they can see that this man is very upset and they're very, he's very concerned. So he shuffles him off to Jal, who takes him all around Pune, and Jal, Baba's brother. And I guess they feel sorry for Robert. So they ship him off to Adi in Ahmednagar. They said, go see Adi, So Robert pays for transportation. The first form of transportation he pays for a bus from second class bus, by the way, which was like 50 paisa, I think. And he goes from Pune to Ahmednagar. He gets to the trust office and he comes across Adi K. Arani. He says, yes, sir, may I help you? And he says, but I'm here to see Baba, and but Baba is not seeing anybody, Adi tells him. He says, but I must see Baba. You don't understand, I've come all this way. And Baba and Adi says, come, have tea, wash up, you look dusty. So he sits down, he has tea, and while he's having tea, he notices that some people are loading up his little backpack and belongings in the car. And so Adi says, you can't meet Baba, but the Mandali would love to see you. So they ship him off in a car to Meherazad. And so Robert makes it to Meherazad. And I want to just read the, in spite of all odds, right? See, this is the theme of Robert's life. In spite of all odds, there he is at the gates of Meherazad. Wait, let me just see, where's my little story? Pardon me, I'm sorry. Okay, so here it is. I just want to say what his words for the gates. I remember thinking when we turned into the beautiful tree-lined drive that leads to the gates of Meherazad, that this was the path leading to the gates of heaven. The only entrance to Meherazad at that time was the green gates. There was no little side road to the clinic. There was no clinic either. You went in through the green gates or you didn't go in at all. When they opened the gates as we approached, I remember what came to my mind was a Zen line about the gateless gate through which you pass and leave yourself behind. So he makes it into the gates of Meherazad, and he's brought to a small bench right by the side on the men's side. And I have some pictures to share, but I'm just going to hold this one up right now. It's a picture of Robert sitting on the bench that was still there years later. I took this picture in '96. And that is the bench that he was brought to. And that was the bench he sat and he waited. And suddenly this soft-spoken man comes out and says, "Hello, brother. What brings you to sitting on this bench?" And that man was Erich. And that was the beginning of a long association Robert had with Erich. But Erich, so he spoke, he told Erich the whole story, and Erich was carrying a bunch of papers and says, "I'll be right back. I've got to go tend to Baba." So he leaves, and then Robert starts meeting all the other Mandali, and Erich comes back a short time later and he says, "I've got wonderful news for you. Baba says that he will see you tomorrow. He wants you to wash up and rest and take," he said, "and sleep in the blue bus." Now, the blue bus was the bus that Baba toured around in the late 30s, and there was Baba's bed in there. And he requested that Robert sleep in the blue bus in his bed. Robert was the only Westerner ever to sleep in the blue bus, and the only Westerner ever to sleep in Baba's bed, as far as I know, a bed. Now, Robert had been sleeping on hard floors and all this, his whole journey for months, and here he was sleeping in the first bed he slept in was Baba's bed. So then the other Mandal, the women come over, and he has this really interesting interchange with Goher, who starts asking him about, "So I heard about all these young Westerners doing drugs in the West." And Robert says he would always describe that moment as a huge karmic snowball rolling down the hill, about to engulf him. And she starts asking him about drugs because supposedly she had received a letter from Kitty in Myrtle Beach, who Alan Cohen had written to Kitty telling him about his experiences on the 6th plane while he was taking drugs, and Kitty didn't know what to make of it. So she shuffled this letter on to Goher. And so Goher pulls out this letter and says, what is this? What are these people doing? And and Robert tried to explain that, the people in the West were taking drugs and they were having all these spiritual experiences. And Goher cracked up saying, only in the West would people think that they could pop a pill and boom, God realization. They've spent their whole life serving the beloved. And so in the middle of all of this conversation with Goher, suddenly Erich pops his head back in and he says, "Baba wants to know if you would like to see him now," because this is like they're talking about drugs, right? And Robert was like, "Well, No, he said like his joke was, yeah, as if I was going to say, no, that's okay. I'll wait until tomorrow. Because he asked him, would you like to see Baba now? So Erich leads Robert around to Baba's bedroom, and right outside the steps that lead up to Baba's bedroom, he stood. And I'll read a little bit of that encounter because it was really quite something. So Robert walks up the steps, and there the door is open and Baba's sitting on his bed. I remember that it was hot and his white sadra was down to his waist. There were a couple of other people in the room with him. I stopped. I looked at Baba. He was just sitting there, beaming. And this was the part of the story that Robert would usually start crying because he would relive it when he was just to see Baba. I instantly felt that all of the struggles, all of the suffering, all of the search that had brought me to this unique point where I was standing in front of the Christ. Baba gestured to Erich, who was at my side. I am happy to see you. I recall with what was left of my mind, he was happy to see me. Baba said, gesturing to Erich, who spoke the words, you look tired and dusty. You should take a hot bath. He said that I should read the Fana and Baka sections of God Speaks that day before the sun set. There was no electricity in Meherazad in those days. Have dinner and get a good night's sleep, and he would see me in the morning. I didn't say a word the entire time. Of course, neither did Baba. It was a dialogue in silence, and Erich was the only one speaking. I stood there with tears streaming down my face. What I saw, and I'm not given to visions, was Baba's face at the center of an incredible effulgence of light radiating from him in every direction. His face, directly in the center, was beaming. The presence of the light caused the reflex of tears. There was no choice in the presence of such magnificence and brilliance but to weep. What Baba showed Robert that day was his divinity. And Robert was so blessed to see that, because the next day, when he saw Baba in Mandali Hall, what he saw was his humanity. So I feel it so deeply because I heard Robert tell that story so many times, and I felt what magnificence that was that he got to witness. So then he was led away from that, and he did wind up reading that section as Baba had requested of the Fana and Baka of God Speaks, and as he said that there was only exactly enough light in the day to read the last line of that last paragraph and absolutely no more. So it was Baba's perfect timing. So the next day was the 17th of November, 1965. And Erich woke him up at 5 a.m. and they went for the walk that Erich would take in the morning. And Erich said, now go wash up. This is your time for your sahavas with God. So Robert walks into Mandali Hall and sees Baba entering at that time, and Baba was in seclusion, and he would only get the exercise of walking up and down the hall every day. So there's this beautiful scenes of Robert saying it, Baba walking in on the arm of Francis, and watching him walk the length of the hall back and forth, and the love play he would have with all his mandali, tugging Baidul's beard or patting, Pendu on the head. And it was just such a sweet little love fest that they would see him once a day. So then Baba takes his seat in the chair that we're all familiar with there. And then the exchange that happens, and I don't know how much of it I want to share because it's a little bit long, but the I think the question, the couple of things that stand out for me as highlights were when Baba sat in the chair and Robert bent down to hug him and he kissed Baba. Baba pointed that he could bow down to his feet, which also was at the time Baba was not allowing anybody to bow down to his feet. So that was a really special thing. And I think, so let me see, do I want to read that? I'm sorry, I'm a little verklempt here. Yeah, he said to bow down to his feet, and of course Robert took that opportunity. And the thing that is so touching about that is when Robert put his head on Baba's feet, he looked up and he saw the hem of his sadra, and he grabbed onto that and he just held it, and that was his moment of bowing down to Baba's feet, holding fast to the hem of his garment. So then Baba said to him, "You're very fortunate to be here. You're blessed. I am in very strict seclusion and I see no visitors. No one is allowed to come." And he said, "This seclusion is necessary for my work. Just before I drop my physical body, I will break my silence, and then what remains of the world will come to know who I am." Just now when I was reading that, when I was looking at this again, I was seeing that Baba said, "What remains of the world," which makes me kind of shudder about where we are right now. So all we can do really is hold fast to him and hope we're one of the few that are there when he breaks his silence. So, and then Baba told him that he wanted him to, wait a second, hold on a second. I lost my place, I'm sorry. I'm getting confused. So then Baba told him that he wanted him to go back to the West, because he said, "What you will find, you will not find wandering around India or sitting in a monastery in the Himalayas," which is exactly what he had planned to do. "But you will find it in society with people and trying to be of service in loving them." And so he basically told him that he had to go straight back, which Robert then did. And he actually told Robert that he was to go back to the job that he had before he left, which was working with schizophrenics in a psych ward in Boston. And when he got back there, of course, he called them and they said, "Oh, we just happened to have an opening back," so he went right back to work there. And then Baba just told him about the three different types of convictions of God. And then then Baba brought up the subject of drugs. And he asked him, "Are many people in the West taking drugs?" And then that's when Baba told him about, doing the drug work. But actually, right before that, Baba had asked him two questions. He asked him if there was anything that he wanted to know. And Robert's immediate response was, "No, there was nothing I wanted to know." And Baba said, "Good, you have had enough of words." And then he asked him, "Is there anything you want?" And Robert said, "Anything I want? I mean, this is the creator. I could ask for anything, a solar system. What does one want?" But then he said, "Yes, Baba, there is one thing I want." And Baba said, "What is it?" And he said that he wanted to see him in everyone and everything always, and to love him as he should be loved for the benefit of others. And Baba said, "This is a very good want. This is the want that will end all wanting." And he said, "But how will you get this prema, this love you seek? By surrendering everything at my feet, by leaving it to me. Don't worry, I will help you. And one day you will see me as I really am." And Robert said he neglected to ask him when that was. So, and that's when then Baba's face grew very solemn. And then he started asking him about the drugs. And he told them that if drugs could make one realize God, then God is not worthy of being God. And he told him that many people in the West have been smoking pot and ganja. And he said that if they kept doing that there would be madness and death for many. So Robert had horror thinking of him being on a soapbox in the Haight-Ashbury Baba says no drugs, but of course it was more subtle than that. And he wound up sending Robert back to the West and connecting him with Alan Cohen and Rick Chapman, who Baba termed them the Boston Baba Boys. And they wound up doing a lot of work for Baba in the drug world. I'm not sure if any of, I think Alan said he couldn't be, but I don't know if Rick is on the call. Rick mentioned that he might come on, but I don't know if he's here or not. He was going to try. But anyway, I think that's the point that I will stop and open it up for sharing or questions. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say. Well, one other thing I'll just share at the end, when Robert was leaving Meherazad after the second day, you know, he was carrying this little knapsack, and you know, Erich came running out with a big sack full of clothes, and he came up to Robert and said, "Baba wants you to have these." And Robert was like, "What am I supposed, you know, I've got this tiny little backpack." And so he opens it up and he sees all these clothes. He says, "What does Baba want me to do with them?" And Erich said, "These are clothes that Baba wore in the West." He said, "You're to wear each item once, and the rest you will know." So we're still, so Robert had these clothes for many years, and it took him many, many years. He did wear them all once, and it took him many years to finally get his mind around having them and making a beautiful box. And I have that box here in Asheville of those beautiful clothes. So one way or another, those clothes made it back to Asheville, and I suspect they may become part of the archive here in Asheville. Sometimes I think that that's the reason I'm in Asheville. Baba brought me here because of the clothes. But anyway, that's my sharing and memory of Robert, and I'm open to, you know, hearing any kind of stories or memories or questions you might have, anybody might have.
So beautiful, Alisa. Thank you so much. You brought tears to all our eyes.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful story.
I don't know, Bob, Aaron, do you want to share a little bit? Dr. Aarons?
Yeah, Bob was going to read some poems too, I think.
Hello.
Oh, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Just to say, echoing some of the things that Alisa has said, that Robert was someone who was the most determined person that I ever met. We were close friends for 30 years. We got to be friends because he loved great literature of any kind. He loved it. And he had the kind of mind that could memorize things, at least then, quite easily. And it just so happened that I also loved great literature, and at that time had that kind of mind too. So we found fun in quoting to each other literature. And on this trip in '79, he was living in India at Vilus at the time, and I was staying there, and I would ride my bike out to Meherazad 3 or 4 times a week to work in the clinic, and he was doing work out at Meherazad also, so we would have hours to spend together. He stayed with me just for a few days prior to heading on this fateful trip to London, and he was so sick when he left, but I'm a doctor. There was absolutely nothing I could do to stop him. I mean, nothing. So things played the way out that they were going to go. He was really witty, and those of you who knew him, he was a great conversationalist. And one thing I'll say before I get into the reading a poem is he was a great friend. He's someone who kept at it, which is a wonderful quality in people. He would keep at it to make sure that the friendship stayed fresh, connected. And that's just a wonderful trait that he had. I'm going to read the last paragraph of the foreword to his book, Blue Ridge Sonatas, which was published posthumously. It's a group of his poems, which he wrote in the last couple of years of his life. He did know it was going to be published prior to dying, which made him very happy. So here's the very end of the foreword, which I wrote for this book. And then I'm going to read a poem or two. So someone can just, yank me off the stage if it gets too long. This is from the foreword. Over the 30 plus years of our friendship, Robert and I had a game we played. One of us would quote a line or two from a poem we had memorized, and the other would try to remember and then recite the next lines. The last time we played this game was in October of 2011, a week or so before Robert died. I quoted from Sonnet 116 of William Shakespeare, "Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come." And Robert replied immediately, although he struggled to enunciate the words, "Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom." This collection of poems bears witness to love's patient triumph over age and mortality. Here, Robert's voice, deep and searching, speaks to us anew. I'm going to read two short poems, and then I'll be done. This is called That Which Binds Us. That which binds us has rendered us apart. The cauldron of desire, the future itself asleep, our intentions the glue which contained us. After all these years, the children grown, our youth exhumed by the dreams that propelled us into the sound charade, only the earth spins towards luminosity. And one other poem. Isn't that beautiful? Just the language. This is called Had I But Known. Once I learned with gratitude that had I but known, I might have applied to be with you, or to be at the threshold, inhaling the joy of your presence. Had I but known, had I been readied to ready myself, practice, though I am not yet at full stay to depart, to supplicate myself, I beg of you to assist me in this journey to the threshold to begin. Bless me with you. Had I but known, you might have loved me, you might have sought to love, I would have, even me, loved you. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Thank you,
Thank
Bob.
you so much, Bob.
Well, I don't see any hands up, and I hate to call on people just unaware. There we go. Mr. Allen, hello. Jai Baba.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Jai Baba.
Well, I knew Robert since July of 1969 when I first came to Berkeley and was ready to become a Baba lover. Although his story was not what brought me to Baba, it was Mick Hamilton's story. But a couple months later, in November of 1969, Robert told his story, and it was the first time I heard it. We had group meetings in those days. They were usually at the University of California or other places. And that when I heard Robert's story, I had the same reaction as when I heard Mick's story. Although Mick's story was just Mick and me, and Robert's story was in a group. And over the years, I heard Robert's story, other than Alisa, perhaps, as many times as anyone. And he used to tell it at Christmas on December 30th, Alisa will remember this, at the center. And the Talbots and the Dreyfuss would always be at the center at that time when the kids were younger. And that was Robert's night, December 30th, and he would tell his story. And the place would be packed, bumper to bumper. And after one of the talks, I said to him, you know, I think I'm your best audience. He said, yeah, that's why I'm always looking at you, because I know I'll get a good response. And I said, every time you tell the story, it's different. And we started laughing, and he said, yes, something new comes into my mind, and I see it a little bit differently. And I said, and it always seems like I remember it differently, even though I've heard it so much. And sometimes he would tell it in the Bay Area here, where he lived most of his time up to the last couple of years. So I heard it quite often. Alisa mentioned the trek he took to Tibet. I'm not sure if this is the trek I'm about to tell about, but at one point in my career, I was getting either National Geographic or Smithsonian. I can't remember which. And they had a fantastic story on Ladakh, or Leh, L-E-H. And I don't know if that's in India or Tibet. But in either event, I was so excited about the story, I cut it out. This is before email and everything on the internet, and mailed it to Robert. You remember mail? Well, I mailed it to Robert. He got so excited. The next time I talked to him or saw him, he says, I've decided, he had gotten a posse up with him and had decided to make this trek, which kind of shocked me. I wasn't anticipating his going on a 3-week trek, because I sent him an article from a magazine. Well, in any event, he took gobs of pictures, as Alisa remembers. And one meeting we had at our center, he showed all these slides, or I guess they would be slides if you put them on. And it was quite fascinating. And I felt kind of like the proud papa of this journey, because I innocently initiated it. So that was sweet. Now, every year, except this year, obviously, we would have large group Thanksgivings, and different families were part of the crew. And we always had the Greensteins and the Dunns and Barry Anthony's. It got fairly large. Sometimes we'd have like 25 or 30 people. And the Dreyfuss would come in occasionally, periodically. And it was always so sweet to have all the Dreyfus's there. They probably came a few times. I can't remember exactly how many Alisa might recall. And sometimes Elisa's mom, Rose, who just died last year, who we loved beyond imagination and conception, would come, and she would always be like, the mother hen through the whole Thanksgiving. And it was always a crew, and the kids were little, the kids were growing up. So we had all these kids running around. It was quite a scene. And along the way, my son, Matthew, who was watching football in the other room, somehow became friends with Josh Dreyfuss, although he was many years older. I think he's 6 or, I don't know if Josh was. He's now apparently engaged, 6 or 7 years. And so Matt would hang out at the Dreyfuss house in Kensington, which is near Berkeley. And I always found it very curious. They had sanskaras together, these two guys, but it drew the families even closer together. And Robert was, as Alisa said, not the easiest person to get close to. I think Bob Ahrens may have been one of the few. And it took a lot of years for Robert to open up to me. But I think when the boys became friendly, he kind of softened up in a way. And he got more intimate. I remember one time, it was kind of not funny, because this wasn't funny on its face. Robert was in the hospital, and he never told people when he was in the hospital. I don't even think he told Alisa. He just went away for a few days. Well, anyway, we somehow found out, as we do. And Karen and I went to visit him. I think he might have been at Alva Bates in Berkeley when the kids were born, and probably his as well. And we're at the hospital, and Robert and I, he was getting better. He was going to be discharged soon. He was a little shocked that we found out. And he said something in the vein of, I said something, and he says, why am I arguing with you? You're a lawyer. You know everything. And I started laughing. I thought that was great. I have to have that on my plaque, but sadly, he's not here to affirm it. So we loved Robert very much. And over the years, he really softened up as a person, and he and I became pretty good friends, more than I anticipated from early in our career. And he was going to leave the Bay Area. And I said, but before that, we had set up a meeting for the 40th anniversary of Darshan. Darshan was in the spring of 69, and this was 2009. And Karen and I always had these parties at our house. So we were going to have this big party for the 40th anniversary of Darshan. I think Alisa remembers this quite well. But it actually ended up, although that too occurred, it actually ended up being a farewell party for Robert. Because Robert was going to leave in about 2 weeks for Asheville. And it was poignant. And I didn't know whether we would see him again or not. His health was what it always was, as Alisa described and has been described. And as he was leaving, I said to him, and this is kind of personal, I said, I don't think this is good. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I don't think this is good. But I didn't want to, upset him or anything like that. I said, this is me. But anyway, we went to Asheville, and Rob and Baron described. He nearly died on the way to India, and yet he came back and was constantly sick. And we would call him, and it's not that easy to understand. And then he was going to come back one further trip for the last Thanksgiving at the Kensington House. And that was in Thanksgiving of 2010. And I called him before that, and I said, Karen, I'd like to have a party for you at our home, after Thanksgiving. That's Saturday, I think, whatever that day that was. And we did. We had a party for him, and people came, and he could hardly speak. And we told stories and jokes. I think most of it was Ursula cutting up on Robert. And he left. And he got sick the next day, and he was placed in the hospital again at Alta Bates in Berkeley. And I happened to be there for, I think, a deposition, not at Alta Bates, but in Berkeley. So I went over. It was a Monday afternoon. And he was in the bed, and he didn't look good. And there were people in there. I didn't know who these people were. Must have been friends from his acupuncture world, or his that world, or his travel world. But there were other people I didn't know. And it was hard to talk to him because it was not, nurses were coming in and that kind of thing. So finally, after about 15 minutes, a nurse came in and it looked like she was going to do a lot of tests. And it looked kind of serious. And I said to him, I took his hand. I said, Robert, I have to leave, but I want you to know I love you a lot. And I knew I would never, and he said the same, extent he could speak. And we helped him, and I left. And that was the last I saw of Robert. He was a great, great guy, and a wonderful father and husband and friend, and a very proud person. We miss him still a lot.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, Barbara Allen.
Yeah,
Well,
those are-
Lots of faces. Alisa, is there someone you think might want to speak?
I don't know, maybe Michael? Yeah, Michael or Scott or Renee.
Michael, do you want to share?
Unmute, Michael. We can't hear you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm trying to remember the first time I met Robert, and I can't quite remember. I know that I moved to the Boston area in 1978, and I have a vague memory that when we had the Baba Center in Inman Square, which some of you know, in Cambridge, we have quite an interesting collection of tapes of people giving talks. And I believe I heard a tape of Robert before I met him, along with Jim McGrew and some of the others who had who had met Baba in the 60s. But whatever it is, we started to connect when Robert would make family trips back to this area. And he would call me up, he would arrange a meeting. We certainly had him here officially as guest. Heizo, you might remember as well, but this would be before I don't know when it would have been. But I remember driving him around putting up Robert many times. And of course, you, Alisa, and Josh stayed with us, I think about a month, didn't he, at one point?
Was it? Yeah.
He was so quiet that nobody knew if he was still living here. He'd be up on the floor. But
Like
I
father,
think-
like son.
I think the things that I could share that would be important were just some impressions that really penetrated into me. I remember many times being in the car driving around. His sister is buried around here, isn't she?
Yes.
I remember one day driving, I believe in the South Shore, maybe it was the town of Sharon, near that. And he asked if we could go to where her grave was. And we spent a day doing that. And also his mother was in a assisted living type of a house near Coolidge Corner. And I remember.
No, his mother never was in assisted living.
No, or what was that, apartment building?
Yeah, apartment maybe, yeah.
Yes, okay, right. So I remember several times, meeting him there, driving there. And then, of course, I felt that we became really good friends, although we did not see each other very often. We do remember family trips with you all. And there was this sense that this is a guy who's passionately in love with life as well. Really earthy. He loved to eat. He insisted every time on going to Regina's Pizzeria,
Yes.
whether it was good or not. He held on to these sensory experiences, and he would gesture and moan with enjoyment, and just had this huge gusto. And I remember very clearly his affection to our daughters, Jyoti and Kalyani. The last time I saw Robert, I was when he was living in Black Mountain.
Mm.
And I went down there and I spent part of the day with him. I had a rental car. There's so many memories, but this one just came to me as people were talking. And some of you might have known that place. It's on the ground floor in the countryside. And he was clearly quite enfeebled in many ways, but his mind was there. He couldn't talk easily. His hands were slow and a little ungraceful in his ability to control his movements. And we talked a long time. Talked about Baba. We talked about death, I believe. And we talked about enjoying what we had and being grateful for all the things that we had had. It was that kind of a talk. And I remember really clearly he's sitting on his bed and I was sitting in a chair and I'm looking out at this view out there in Black Mountain. And the thought came to me that this is a guy living a life like Thomas Merton in a cell, who's somehow been able to simplify, pare down, pare away, shed so much, and was just so on the beam about keeping the fog away, about his grasp of reality, whatever that was for him in those moments. He was really vibrating in that meeting, our last meeting, very clear, seemed quite calm. And I just wanted to share that I felt so grateful that we had had those last moments, wrapping up the details. It was clear that I was going to see him very much more. Perhaps this was the last time, but that was a precious memory. I just want to say that I felt he was a great man. However one would define that, a great man. poetic, earthy, deliciously vulgar when it took the right moment to be that way. And a great gift to our generation who never met him. Okay, thank you for this moment to share this.
Thank you, Michael. Before we go on, I'm just going to share something that I got from Anne Meringue in India. But I just want to say, Michael, I just have so many memories of all of us being together in Boston and just touched by some of those sharings. But Anne Meringue sent me this email this morning because she wasn't able to come on because the time difference and she wasn't feeling well to stay up late. But she just wanted me to share that she had a special memory of Robert that was very touching to her. And she said it revolves around Pendu and how he had come back for Pendu. At the time he was living in India from 1978 to 1982. Danny Ladinsky at the time was living at Meherazad and taking care of Pendu. But Robert would ride every day from Meherazad out to Meherazad on his motorcycle. And one day, just to be with Pendu. And one day he was in an accident and a truck forced him off the road and he had broken several ribs. But she said that didn't stop Robert. Even when his broken ribs and his pain, he still made it out every day to see Pendu. And she said that just touched her. And actually, Robert was in the room alone when Pendu died. Pendu died in his arms, actually. Everybody had gone out on the veranda, she recalls, also for tea. And Robert stayed in to forego tea and sit with Pendu and actually was holding Pendu in his arms when he died. So she wanted just to share that, to say something about, you know, the fortitude and the dedication that Robert had. So I just wanted to make sure I got that in for her. Thank you.
Hey, Baba. Beautiful. So what a man. And also just to have the, you talk about the fortitude, but I appreciate the heart that stays with someone as they're in the doorway to death. That's just a gift. And it speaks to me as a nurse. So thank you. Is there anybody else? I'm not sure who else, Alisa. I'm not,
Jeff Wolverton, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you.
anyway, yeah, just a couple of short stories that come to mind about Robert. One of my, I think it was Fred Winterfeld told me, when Robert went to India on this trip that Alisa described, on his way back, he came into New York and the Monday night group was there. And Fred was going to grab him and get his story of, as I remember, get his story of his time meeting with Baba. So he's brought to this is the famous Monday night group, and he gets there, and most of these people are older. I think Robert was about 25 at the time, and so and most of the people there in the Monday night group had all met Baba, but they're eager to hear his story. And this is, as I remember, Fred Winterfeld telling me, but he gets up there in the front of the room. This was like a little recital hall where they would have meetings. And they said, well, what was it like to meet Baba? And he said, I went from here to here. And that was the end of his talk. They couldn't get anything more out of him. But that's a long journey from there to there. But that was, and they couldn't get any more out of him. So I thought, you know, that has always struck me, because I know Erich really encouraged, in my own case, to remain down here, get my consciousness down here at the heart level. And Baba, that happened to him during his visit. And the other thing is this, Robert used to share this, and some of you probably heard this, but he was an assistant to Audie for a time, there in the 70s, late 70s. And he's in Audie's office with Audie, and he's sitting in a chair, and Audie's on his comfortable, easy chair there. And Padre storms in, and he's in a rage. He's angry, and he starts yelling at Audie in Gujarati, and then Audie gets irritated and everything. He starts yelling back at Padre, and they go back and forth, yelling at each other, and then Padre just storms out. And then Audie looks over at Robert and said, Did that upset you? And Robert said, did it upset me? I wanted to sink into the earth and disappear. It was terrible. What was I doing here? And Audie says, well, it didn't upset us. So, it's like they could go at each other, but they didn't take it personally. And so anyway, I thought that gave you a kind of a glimpse of the way the Mandali were with each other. They could lay into each other, but it didn't get heart deep at all. So those are my two little stories.
Thank you, Jeff.
Beautiful. So, hi, Zoe. Jay Baba.
Hi, Jay Baba. Yeah, Michael reminded me because I also moved to Cambridge in 1978, and that is where I first met Robert. Maybe I had heard a tape of him telling his story, but I have a clear memory of him coming and telling it at our little Baba Center. And that detail about the top of the truck, this easy chair on the top of the truck, just really stayed with me. And I remember him saying at one point he was trying, I guess he was asking directions. He was trying to figure out how to even get to where he understood Baba to be. And he said, Indians are so polite that they will never tell you they don't know or that they can't help you. So people were telling him all kinds of, yes, go up here, do this, do that. None of it was working. So he was, very charming guy. And I remember that he seemed real diligent about coming back to see his family. And I gathered that was not easy. His parents had this brilliant, talented, incredible son. He'd gone to Harvard, and what did he do with it? He went off to India and becomes this holy man. So I guess he didn't always stay with them, but he would come see them pretty regularly. And at one point when we were in Boston, I had a job working at Harvard Radcliffe Hillel, which was the Jewish campus organization. And I was a secretary to these three rabbis. And so this woman showed up in my office, and it was Robert Dreyfuss's sister. Mm. And she introduced herself. And what she really wanted from me, she said, do you know Robert Dreyfuss? I said, oh, yeah, and what I think she was hoping I could help her to understand what it was about Meher Baba, or how to reconcile being a Boston Jew with following Meher Baba. And she said, he gave me a book of poetry by some guy with a Jewish name. I said, Steve Klein? She said, yeah, I think so. And apparently he thought that would help, but it hadn't. So that's, anyway, I think I know I invited her to come to to our little center and go to a meeting or something, but she never did. But another thing I remember from those days about Robert was we went with him. I don't think you were with us, Michael, but you might have been, to see Say Amen, Say Somebody. It's this documentary about Black gospel singers, and it was playing at the Orson Welles Theater. And it's a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, do. But Robert went with me and Jamie anyway, and a lot of the audience was Black. These were all people in their church clothes. They were treating it as a church service, which it kind of was, and we were all in our jeans and sandals. And that's the thing I remember about Robert so vividly, is that he loved music and he was very enthusiastic, and he didn't have a really great singing voice. Right? But these people in the audience who were treating it as a congregation were singing along, and Robert was singing along, and he was clapping, and he was just really getting into it. And that was a side of him I had not previously seen, but it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like sharing those things. Thanks.
Thank you, Zoe. I just want to say a couple things about what you said. Robert's sister, her name was Linda Susan Dreyfuss, and Baba had mentioned her actually in one of his correspondence because her initials were LSD, Linda Susan Dreyfuss. So yeah, and so Baba had mentioned her. He knew her, and she did come to the center subsequently. She came in 1990. And I have such a beautiful memory. It meant so much to Robert. I was pregnant with my daughter, Mani, at the time, and Josh was 2. And she had gone into Baba's house, and I was in the room with Baba. She went into Baba's bedroom, and she came out, and she just sat in the porch on Baba's house, and she started weeping. She just came out of Baba's room, and she was just weeping. She didn't say anything. And Darwin Shaw was standing there, I remember. And Josh, my son, who was 2.5 years old, just went up to her and hugged her and held her, and she cried on his shoulder. And I have pictures of it. It was so beautiful. And I remember Darwin Shaw being so touched by the fact that my son was comforting her. And it was just such a beautiful moment, and it meant so much to Robert. So, because then Linda had a stroke. She had a brain aneurysm and passed away in 1996. So she, she got to get in, she let Baba in. She wouldn't have said she was a Baba lover, but, and then the other thing I just want to say is, Robert's father, when Robert came back from India, you mentioning his being like, his parents couldn't make heads or tails of all of this, right? What he was doing. And his father said to Robert, when Robert came back and told his parents that he had met the Christ. I mean, he said, I couldn't contain it. I had to tell them that I met God in human form. And his father's response was, oh, okay, well, that's good. But what does he do for a living? So Robert said, well, he runs the universe. But that was about the extent of his parents' understanding. But anyway, okay, so Scott.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Bob.
Wonderful to be here with you and sharing remembrances of Robert as a friend and a really wonderful human being. I was introduced to Robert by a very close mutual friend that many of you had the privilege of knowing as well, I believe, Hildy Halpern, who was a very close friend of my grandmother's and an unofficial godmother to me growing up. And I had spent a couple of years in China, was interested in studying Chinese medicine in the States and California, and Hildy connected me with Robert. And quite a long relationship ensued, and a friendship with lots of twists and turns. And Robert was quite extraordinary in many ways. he was extraordinarily generous to someone who he'd never met before. And I realized that if Hildy had written to me and said, there's someone I want you to help out and, do what you can for them, I would have done absolutely everything I possibly could out of my love and appreciation for her. And so that was a bond that we started with, a deep connection with a very special woman and Baba lover. So I moved to Berkeley, moved to the Bay Area in 1986. And just at that time, Robert's life situation was that he was in a house that someone had moved out of, and he needed someone to help him with the rent and someone to share the house. And so in very short order, we were sharing a house up in the hills in Kensington. And that was a wonderful and challenging experience for us both. We were quite different. I think I was 28 or 29 at the time, and Robert, I think, about 15 years older. And the house was completely full of Baba. It was just extraordinary pictures and radiance of Baba throughout. It was really a wonderful environment. And we had quite a bit of we had some differences of styles. I remember leaving a teacup unwashed in the sink once, and that led to some consternation from Robert. So we had some challenges figuring out how to cohabit in a house. But it was a very long friendship and association. And Robert was extremely, as I said, very generous. And he opened doors and introduced me to people in the Chinese medical community in the Bay Area immediately on arrival, which in my youth at the time, I don't know if I fully appreciated what that did for me and my career and my studies there. So we maintained friendship over the years, 15 years I lived in the Bay Area, and would frequently meet for sushi. That was a favorite mutual pastime with some wasabi competition along the way, as I recall. And I was in the house that I mentioned with Robert when Robert met Alisa. And I remember watching him. Didn't really spend much time with you, Alisa, but I remember watching him as he was getting to know you. And it was a wonderful thing to see a friend falling in love, and just all the things that the radiance that accompanied that was a real treat. And then was privileged to be asked to be part of your wedding, and that was a really wonderful and special occasion. And then there was an interesting little chapter that I don't know if I've appropriately apologized to you for, Alisa, but I've been sharing the house with Robert. Robert and Lisa got married, and then they're obviously going to try to find a house. And they do find a nice house in Berkeley. And I think I was right in the middle of my acupuncture boards, and all sorts of things were happening quickly. And Robert asked me to join them in this new house. He wanted help with the mortgage, which was a very reasonable idea from his point of view. And I didn't have time to go look for another place. Everything was happening very quickly. And I said, okay. So I ended up joining newlyweds in their first, their house together. And it was wonderful, and it was awkward. It was all sorts of things. And I think Alisa was extremely tolerant of having another person in the house. It was not, I didn't always feel very welcome, and I certainly understand why in retrospect. So anyway, I'm glad I could help out with the mortgage payments for a while, and eventually, before Josh came along, I managed to move out and set up shop myself someplace else. I left the Bay Area in 2000, moved to England, and didn't really have much contact with Robert. Well, I lived there for 8 years. And then in exploring where to move, looking as a family to move back to the States, I came to visit Asheville, and everything just sort of fell into place. It was, as many Baba lovers have said, it just kind of, Baba was a magnet drawing me here. And then I came back a second time with my wife, Diane. And I'd known Molly and Merwan in the Bay Area and connected with them. And it was Easter. They said, come on over for Easter. Come over for Easter dinner. We're going to be over at Molly's mom, Roz's house. And this was just before Roz and Bobby Boudreaux opened up the Blackbird restaurant out in Black Mountain. So we went to Roz's house and sat out on the porch and arrived there. And there was Molly and Merwan and Roz and Bobby Boudreaux and Pat Griffin and Robert. And we both looked at each other and like, what are you doing here? What's this all about? And Robert said, well, I just moved here. I said, when? He said, last week. I said, well, it looks like we're moving here, in 6 months. And it was just one of those Baba things of our paths that twist and turn and reconvene in ways we don't expect. So on moving here, reconnected with Robert and had the pleasure of spending quite a bit of time with him and his little, I like Michael's analogy of the Thomas Merton cave in Black Mountain, extraordinary little place full of an immense library and art collection, and fond memories of hanging out with Robert there. He took up ping pong. He was a very, very passionate ping pong player. And of course, he'd done his research about how it was better, helpful for Parkinson's and medical reasons. So we would often play ping pong and watch Kurosawa movies and things of that kind. And then there was this period that was very touching and sad and beautiful and all sorts of things as Robert's health really deteriorated when he was living in Black Mountain. And spent a lot of time with him, took him to a number of medical appointments where he was confounding Chinese and particularly the Western medical establishment with what was going on with him. And it was wonderful to spend time with him and his other people have spoken about his stubborn, intrepid nature. And that was certainly on full display. I remember a number of us having a meeting out in Black Mountain, a group of Robert's friends. I think Renee was there and a number of other people. And basically we were trying to decide, well, how are we going to help Robert? Because he was just so incredibly difficult to help at this point. Not following medical advice. And, of course there was the ill-fated attempt to get back to India. But it was a challenge, and he was bucking a lot of people who were trying to help him. And I so admire his spirit, and I'm also aware of some of the consequences in his wake of his determination that left a number of people who loved him dearly scrambling to try to help, to adapt, to manage as best as possible. And he was in and out of the hospital here a couple of times, sort of on the edge, supposedly, of checking out, but then rebounding. And I recall that he didn't want to be in the hospital, but he really needed to be. And he called Bobby Boudreaux and said, break me out. You got to get me out of here. So literally kind of ducking under the nurse's station, practically, he was spirited out of the hospital and then eventually was helped to return. It was quite a lot of adventures as he was, to the very end, maintaining his spirit and his independence, and certainly defying anybody else to tell him what to do. But most of all, he was Baba's, and you could feel that hold of his hand on Baba's hem in his life and in his work, all the work that he did over the years professionally, but also personal connections. And it was a gift from Baba to know him and have some time with him. And I'm very grateful. Jai Baba.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, I just want to say, I think that I was Robert's healthcare power of attorney till the end. and had to make these work with this whole situation that Scott was talking about from afar, and made several trips back and forth. And it was very, very challenging. He was very difficult to really surrender. He had, bucked against all that denial that he had built up his whole life, about just really letting people know that he was sick, as well as, surrendering to it himself. So it was a hard road. But one thing I just want to share is occurring to me that I forgot to say: when he was in Baba's presence, one of the things that Baba had inquired the day he met him in Mandali Hall was, "How is your health?" And Baba did the sign of that health, his pulses. And Robert said, "Well, I've been, having some digestive problems." And so Robert sent Goher out to get some pills, and he took the pills in his hand and he gave them to Robert. And that became a theme of first of all, Baba marked that, because that became Robert's major suffering, was his digestion, more so than even the asthma as time went on. And so in the end, what killed him. But Baba had all the correspondence he had with Baba. And if you see, when you look at his book, you'll see the correspondence in the back. Baba always inquired about his health, and made a special thing to be constantly telling him to take care of his health, to take care of his health. And so health and spirit and his spiritual journey were so entwined. I mean, he became an incredible healer, Robert. I mean, he was an acupuncturist, and most successful acupuncturist that most anybody knew in the Bay Area. People would come from far and wide to see him, and yet he couldn't heal himself. And so this was his theme. And I think reading his epilogue at the back of his book, really, when the book was published and I actually read the book, saw it was after his death, I had not seen the epilogue, and I read the epilogue after he died, and I just wept for days after reading that epilogue, because I really felt that he really put it all together. I mean, what Scott is describing is one of the reasons our marriage broke down. And I just couldn't, I knew he wouldn't ever let me help him, and I just couldn't. He was like a train that was going to hit into a wall, and I couldn't be there for it. I was like, I'm out. I can't watch this, and then, but I was involved. Baba said, yes, you can live apart, but you're involved till the end, and finished my karma with him. But it made me so happy to hear that he actually put that together, that just how he had created so much of his own suffering, and how much he had caused suffering to other people by this denial, and how it was so intertwined in his spiritual journey. So so anyway, I just want to share that, because that was a really, he did cause a tremendous amount of damage to himself and to other people in that process, but it was who he was, really. Okay.
Dr. Aaron, did you want to say something?
Yes.
Okay.
Just to comment on that, the other side, the flip side of the coin of this stubbornness and denial, is that it worked for him. He had an early attack as a child, very sick child, not only to ignore and not let his illness or illnesses in the future get in his way, but to challenge himself physically at every step. And it worked. I mean, what you see is determination. He met Baba.
That's what I was saying in the beginning. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it worked. He was able to do many things with the kind of illnesses that would overwhelm me his whole life, because he found a way early to go ahead, be successful, live his life, love Baba, and still have all these illnesses. So it was tough for other people, of course, around him, and no doubt it was tough for him. But on the other hand, he succeeded.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He would have never done what he did had he not had that denial. And, it was his greatest gift and his greatest curse. And that's what he talks about in the epilogue. So thank you for reiterating that, Bob. That's really important. So we've got a couple more people who have their hands raised. I see Judy and Elaine.
Yeah, Elaine is next, so.
Okay, Elaine. Okay, sorry, Ruth, you're handling this. That's right.
Okay, I'm here, but when I first sat down, I didn't turn on with the visual because I thought I was going to be moving around and doing small stuff in my office. And I ended up being transfixed in front of my laptop, enjoying every minute of this. I wanted to thank all of you for all of your contributions. It helped me remember an awful lot of things about Robert. I had come to Baba in 1967 through an American named Jerry Paulson, who, when he had gone to India because he had heard from Mick and Ushi Hamilton about Baba out in California, and he was an old friend of ours from the University of Kentucky in Lexington for a year. Very close friend, this guy Jerry. And he had met Robert and he had met Mick. And it turns out that Jerry was a very kind of unique person and extreme sort of person in a way. And when he heard about Baba out in California, he decided he was going to go and see Baba, even though we weren't supposed to even communicate at that time. But he did go and see Baba. And his story is a long story, but similar to Robert's in a way. But in India, I think Robert was there at the same time. I'm not sure about that. But because we were in New York City, I forgot to say that at the beginning. And the first time I actually met Robert is when he came to give his talk at the Monday night meetings. And he stood up and did that. And I remember being, and of course I knew who he was, and I made it a point to be at that Monday night meeting, not to miss it, because I was going to meet Jerry's friend and acquaintance, Robert. And Robert got up and said these few words and sat down. I remember thinking, well, that's not what I expected. But as years went on, this Jerry, he moved away and he kind of stopped contacting anyone in the Baba world. And he had been very, very close to us. And I lost track of him. I didn't know where he was. And every once in a while, I would write Robert and say, Robert kept in touch with him, is the thing. That was the link. And it always gladdened my heart how quickly and sweetly Robert would respond. And he would say, well, I heard that he moved to Hawaii and he's doing well out there. And he'd say something like that. And I never wanted to bother him too much about it, but I think the last time I spoke to Robert, I think it wasn't an email. I think it was a phone call. I'm not sure. But I did ask him, what's the latest on where Jerry is now? And he told me fully, that he had gone into business and he was doing very well in real estate in Hawaii, and he'd had a family and all this. And I was so grateful to hear it. And I think that was pretty late. That might have been, I think he was living here in Asheville. I'm in Asheville now. And I think it might have been from Asheville. It might be one of the little reasons I had Asheville in the back of my mind when I left the New York area. Anyway, Robert was an important link in many ways that I didn't realize at the time. But I always felt when I was talking to him or whenever I was around him in India, it happened a couple of times, I felt the presence of, he was never verbose about it. You never really, got any explanations or anything from him. And I felt it was very private, and I never wanted to intrude or anything. But I always felt this incredible interior strength about Robert. And I always appreciated the fact that he was part of my link to Baba. So thank you. All of this has helped me remember all of these fine qualities about him. And I wouldn't have missed a minute. I never got up from my chair.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was wonderful. I just am alerted that Rick Chapman has joined. Ruth, is there a way you can unmute him? Because I would like him to have a word. He was one of the Boston Baba boys with Robert.
Yeah, there he is.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Great. Hey, that worked.
There you go.
Hi,
Hi, Rick. Jai Baba.
friends and family of dear Robert. Yeah, it's very hard to dive in and pick just a memory of Robert. But I'll start before any of you would have had those memories, because I knew him before you did, having met him in Cambridge. He, in fact, was engaged in activities that when I described them at Robert's memorial, caused Alisa's mother to lean over and say to her in the front row, "If I'd known all that, I probably wouldn't have allowed you to marry him." Because he was the pot connection for a professor of mine, and then basically held forth with a salon in Cambridge nightly with about 20 people dropping by with various degrees of stoneness. There was the MA degree, the PhD degree, and the I'm too far gone to no degree. So out of that background, and I mention it because it relates to the way that Baba works in a very fundamental sense. It was Robert who brought back the essential seeds of Baba's drug message. He was the one who had the Constitution sanskarically to bring back the message that would begin to change everything for the Western world that was engaged in and committed to finding higher consciousness through psychoactive drugs. So when Robert came back, the message that Baba had given him reverberated through the upper echelons of the psychedelic community. And I was present when one night Richard Alpert called at a house where Alan and I were living, and Robert was visiting that night. And Alpert called and said, I need to know, I've heard that Baba says no drugs. Is that true? And Robert talked to him for about 10 minutes, and the rest is history. Alpert defected from the psychedelic movement, took a journey to India with the intention of becoming Baba's disciple, but Baba's seclusion was so strict that he didn't even permit an audience. And he found another guru and became a disciple and came back to America with a drug-free approach to higher consciousness. So Robert's connection with the drug movement is central, and it is central again today because, as you all know, drugs are a new issue. 50 years later, 50 plus years later, there is maybe even a greater need for Baba's message that drugs cannot yield enlightenment or higher consciousness. So it is with that in mind that I remember that aspect of Robert. I am sorry to have missed so many stories that must have been told. I had an other appointment this morning and barely got in time to have this opportunity. But never mind, I knew Robert and Robert knew me, and we came to Baba together. And that's a rare event. Alan Cohen was our actual Baba contact, in the sense that simultaneously, and I do mean at the exact same moment, we came to know Baba's name and some information about him at Alan's office in the psychology building at Harvard. And our trip to become Baba lovers began at that moment together, and we took it together for a number of years after that. So I think, since I know that we're at the tag end of the session and that there are others who probably have yet to speak or have things to add, I'll call it a day, but I wanted to join and celebrate dear Robert's life and his next life, because I'm counting on him. He took off before the rest of us and is bound to be instrumental in helping each of us find the Ancient One in his next incarnation. Jai Baba, one and all.
Thank you, Rick. I just want to say that I prepared a really short, like 3-minute little slideshow of some pictures of Robert past and more current. If we want to have a minute to show that now before the last few people share, or should we just have people share and show it at the end? But I just wanted to show it while people were all on. So I don't know what you think, Ruth, if you think.
That's a great idea. Why don't you go ahead? You know how to share the screen and do that?
I think so. I'm going to try now. Let's see. That's a good question. I have to go to my, can I just open it and then hit share? It's in my iPhoto.
I think if you go through share, you can come to iPhoto, the photo, and bring it up from there. I'm not sure. Or you can
photo maybe. Let's see.
Yeah, you can start by sharing your screen and then open whatever is on the screen.
Okay, is that right now? Can you guys see my screen?
No. Sometimes I bring it up to my desktop. I just bring it up first, and then I go to share. And that works for me.
Maybe I'm not going to be able to. Okay, so here is it's shared. I have it open, but I don't know. Maybe I'm not going to be able to do it. Sorry, guys. Oh, see, because if I hit share screen, multiple participants.
Don't give up. Take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, it could also be.
Because when I hit share, it just opens like desktop, iPad.
Any downloads?
Let's see, slides as virtual background.
No. Again, if you would open the slideshow right onto your desktop first.
Okay, let's see.
Open that up to your desktop and then go to share desktop. And you'll be able to see where the slideshow is and click on it. Share computer screen, share.
Allow Zoom to share your screen and then open system preferences.
Well, just allow Zoom to share your screen.
Yeah, that's what. Can you see that now?
Not yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe we can't do it.
Okay.
I don't know what.
What I might do is let Judy share a little bit, and then you and I can chat a bit, see if we can figure it out.
Another alternative might be, Lisa, if you just leave the meeting, get the slideshow back on your desk, and then come back on and
It is, I mean, I have it open. I can see it. It's right here. I have my iPhoto open and it's, wait, maybe I have to export it to my desktop.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe do that. Let me try that. So yeah, go ahead, Judy. You can start sharing. I'll just see if I can work on this for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, so go ahead. You can share, Judy, because it's going to take a second to export it.
You there? Jude?
Okay. Yeah, I had been muted. Hello, everybody. This is such a lovely gathering. And actually, my share was going to segue beautifully from Rick's, because for me, Robert and Rick go very closely together, along with Alan Cohen. I first met actually all of them in early '69 and speaking in Berkeley. So I'm one of the West Coast kids that got the direct message from Baba about drugs from, that Robert brought back. And it was so wonderful in those early days in '69 and then the early '70s. Rick and Robert and Alan would come often to our Baba League meetings in Berkeley. And that, of course, is where I first heard Robert share his story of getting to meet Baba. And needless to say, it was incredibly inspiring. It was like, oh my gosh, because this is like our generation getting to be able to
whatever you need permission.
Actually, yeah, thanks, Alisa. Get to he met Baba, and that was so enlivening. And I also had the opportunity in '86, so years later, exactly 20 years later, from Robert's first meeting with Baba, or well, really only time with Baba. He came back to Meherazad to celebrate at, the 20th anniversary of his meeting Baba. And it was my good fortune to be in Mandalay Hall on that day. And of course, Erich asked him to share a story. And little did I know later I would be living at Meherazad for a number of years. And given all of the time that I was blessed to have at Mandalay Hall, Robert sharing his story of meeting Baba 20 years afterwards, that particular day was one of the most inspiring memories that I remember from all the years in Mandalay Hall. And then I did, I was fortunate to be living over at Meherazad during the '90s and 2000s. And Robert would come over quite a number of times. And during those times, Dr. Ann and I had trained in a type of Tai Chi called the wild goose. And at that point, I was still pretty much like a lame duck rather than a graceful wild goose. But we discovered that Robert had been practicing the wild goose form for many years, and he had really mastered it. So in the early mornings, the three of us would meet together in the compound up just outside Baba's samadhi and practice the wild goose together. And for me, of all of my experiences with Robert, his ability to literally embody a graceful wild goose through this Tai Chi form speaks volumes of his, what all of these wonderful shares that people have been making about how he overcame things and flowed through life. And it was just, I remember very fondly those early morning practices with Robert of this very graceful form, and actually getting to see he was better than the Chinese master that had taught Anne and I. And I think that was probably that was only one little iota of what Robert was about, but I think it embodied well how he lived at his life and his love for Meher Baba that radiated everything he did. So that's my relatively brief share. And I'm grateful to him for so many things. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, Judy, thank you. Beautiful. And Susan Paul, you've been waiting patiently. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. Can you find the button on your computer to do that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ruth. Good to see you. And I first learned about Robert at Meherazad when I was getting ready to treat both Jal and Dolly Dustur the same day, the same hour, in two separate rooms in their house at Meherazad. It took a little bit of organization to make this happen, and their house staff was helping, and everything was moving forward. I was all ready to, I was going to start with Jal. He had a broken hip at that point, and everything was ready. I was getting my needles ready, and one of the house buys came in and said something to Jal in Marathi, I guess, and Jal said to me, "Oh, Susan, Robert Dreyfuss has just arrived. We'll have to do this treatment another time." And I said, oh, well, okay, that's fine. I knew who Robert was, but I had never met him to that point. So I collected all my accoutrements, and the point was that Robert had come, and this was almost like Baba had come to the house. This is the way everyone received him. And Robert was going to treat them while he was there. So I was living at Meherazad at this time. It didn't bother me in the least, and I withdrew. Robert treated them. Years later, when Robert was living in Asheville, and quite impaired by then, I offered to treat him. And again, he said, "No, Scott is treating me." So I said, okay. I said, "Well, what can I do to help you, Robert?" And he said, "Can we go out to lunch sometime, and can you take me shopping?" I said, "Well, of course." So I figured out how on my days off I would have time with Robert. And I used to go and pick him up in Black Mountain. He loved Japanese food. So we'd usually go to a Japanese restaurant in downtown Asheville. And then he loved to go shoe shopping. Now, he never bought shoes, but he tried on hundreds of pairs of shoes at Tops in downtown Asheville. He loved to see the salespeople carrying out stacks of boxes of shoes, and then he would take his time trying them on, walking a very little bit, coming back, deciding they weren't the right shoe, and on and on. And it was his pleasure to be out in the world, I think. And I was just observing him doing this. I was so amazed at how he was conducting things. And then very shortly before he died, it was in October of the year he died, there's an annual event in Asheville called Locks Around the Clock. It's a Jewish food festival. And I always used to go with one particular friend of mine. And so this year I was there, and I was online for the chopped liver, and there I see Robert in a very weakened state, standing online with his attendant for the corned beef sandwiches. And I asked someone to hold my place, and I went over to Robert. I said, Robert, I'll stand online for you. Why didn't you go and sit down? He said, no, I want to stand online. I looked at his attendant, who gave me a kind of shrug like this. And I said, well, you know, Robert, these lines move pretty slowly. Are you sure you want to stand all this time? He said, no, I really want to stand. And he was very emphatic, and I knew he didn't want me to interrupt his experience of being out in the world, doing something that was fun for him and meaningful to him. And he really wanted that corned beef sandwich. So I went back on the line, and I kept an eye on him, and his attendant and I kept making eye contact, which was good. I just thought in case she needed help, I was there. And he got his corned beef sandwich, you know, about half an hour later of standing online, which I was quite stunned that he was able to do it, but he did do it. After he died, I was in Meherazad when he died, but someone in Asheville gave me a book that he had said was for me, and it was a multicultural medical survey, basically, of different cultures' medical systems. It was a very academic book, which had his handwriting inside it, and it was very meaningful to me. I very purposely brought it back to India with me the next time I went. I gave it to Dr. Ann, and I said, I think this book should stay at Meherazad. And Robert gave it to me. I am giving it to you. Please keep it in the library at Meherazad. In the Meherazad hospital, the Meher Hospital at Lower Meherazad, there is a library. I had helped Ann organize it years before. It's a wonderful resource for anyone who's interested in anything medical when they're at Meherazad. And that's where this book is now. So that piece of Robert went back to India. And it was indeed an enormous honor to know him as a friend. And even though he never wanted me to help him, I was happy to do whatever he could tolerate at any given time. And that was my experience with Robert. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
So beautiful.
So beautiful. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Susan. I love that locks around the block. So I think I figured it out, Ruth. If you can, it says that you need to allow me to share though. When I hit this, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So
yeah, I thought
somebody has to enable me to share.
Is Angela around? I know she had stepped out.
I asked Angela, but she hasn't answered. So I don't know if it's going to be possible. I was being able to share, seemed like before, but.
Yeah, let me just look real quick here. There may be a way. Let me see. Oh yeah, it's down here. Hold on. Security. Okay. I think you should be able to share screen.
All right, now I should be able to share it. Let's see, share my desktop.
Yes.
You see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so just do this and then Winnie can share. Wait, is it coming?
Yes, but it
Wait,
has.
let me see if I can make it bigger. Hold on. There we go.
Yeah, there you go. Beautiful.
That's when Robert just met Baba. Sebastian and Ed Van Buskirk, Sebastian Baker. Rick and Alan. Alana Aarons, and Josh and Monty. Saurabh and Jacko. Bob and Josh. Celebrating my birthday with Erich. That's Robert's first wife, Sherry. Thank you.
Rainey, I think we have just enough time if you'd like to share. You there? Can't hear you, Rainey.
Is the sound working?
Something's wrong on her end.
Maybe we can have Winnie share, because Winnie was really there with Robert at the end, helped him with his book.
All right, let's see if I can find her down here. There she is, Winnie Barrett. Jay Baba, Winnie.
Baba.
Sorry, go ahead and unmute.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Well, I just won't take long, but I wanted to say that in 1983 was the first time I met Robert. And I was in India and staying at Vilu's, and Robert was at the dinner table. I think he had just arrived. And we had a conversation. And when he found out I was from Denver at that time, he said, oh yeah, he had been in Denver at National Jewish Hospital. And I said, that's where I had my first social work job. So you had this interesting connection. Then when he moved here, his health was poor and getting worse. And there were lots of goings on about that I won't get into, but he said he wanted to write a book and tell his stories. And I said, if you like, I'll help you. And he wasn't really able to write them at that point. So I recorded each one of his stories. And then I either transcribed them or had a couple of other people help me transcribe those. And that became the content of the book. And then later, Ann Giles came into the mix and put together all the pictures and memorabilia and things like that. So it took about a year, and I would go every week, sometimes twice a week, over to his house, and he would tell stories. And it was really quite amazing. And I'm so glad I had that opportunity. And he was
Yes.
really happy when it got done. And I think he was just hanging on by threads until we got it done. And then as soon as he heard that it had been accepted by Sheriar to publish it, he lasted about 2 weeks after that. Then he passed.
Well, actually, I'd like to just say a little bit about that, because I don't even think it was that long, because the last conversation I had with Robert, I had had surgery Halloween weekend. I had to get a polyp removed from my uterus, and I had had the surgery on Friday, and Robert called me on Friday night, Friday afternoon, to see how I was doing. And we had a conversation at that time. And that was my last conversation with Robert. And in that conversation, he was calling to see how I was doing. And he kept saying, I wish I could come there and help you. You've been so helpful to me. And we had this lovely conversation. And he told me all about the fact that the books had just been sent off to the publisher. And we had had this ongoing joke, Robert and I, that I said he had to live long enough to print his books. That's how I kind of kept him along. And I used Rick Chapman. I used your book as a little poker to say, Rick has his book. You've got to get your book out, Robert. And Winnie came in to help him at the end. But so he told me the books got sent off to Sheriar. And I remember him saying, I just only hope I can live now to see them published. And then the last thing he said to me was, I love you, which was actually something Robert hadn't been saying to me. We hadn't said that to each other in a long time. And I said, I love you too. And we hung up, and the next day is when he died. He died the next day. That was the 30th of October when I talked to him. And it was the 31st of October that he died. So literally it was true. Baba kept him alive so his book, I think, is an important book. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, Baba wanted this book published. So he never did live to see it, but he died right after it got sent off to Sheriar. So, but thank you so much, Winnie, for all you did to make that possible. He couldn't have done it without you.
Well, it was an honor to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've asked the boss if we have more time, and I haven't heard back from her. Someone's supposed to start a program at 2:00. So,
yeah, I think we are. But I mean, I don't know, maybe we have another minute or two. If Rainey has figured out her sound, maybe she could say
well,
what
we
she.
should try for Rainey. Yes.
Rainey, did you want to try again? No, it doesn't look like your sound is working. Sorry, Rainey.
Rosalie has her hand up as well. So
Rosalie, did you have something you want to say right at the end?
Well, I've been waiting. I'm so happy to hear that this was happening, Alisa. And my first thought was a little tiny poem of Phyllis Frederick, and it says, man cannot have God without telling stories. And God cannot have man without creating stories. In this storytelling universe, I am only a comma. And when I only met Robert like in the distance in the group, probably in Berkeley a long time ago, telling his story. And somehow there was something about his telling his story that just totally drew me into that story. It wasn't like just his story. is what my feeling was. And I even feel it stronger as I'm here talking about it. So anyway, the next time I was at the Sahabas and you were marrying Robert, you know, and I even thought I caught your bouquet. I have some memory of catching the bouquet. It's so funny. And then, you know, and then I remember the book coming out, Hearing He Passed, the book coming out. I loved that book. I just loved it. And it just filled out whatever our story. I mean, I would love to traipse up the Himalayas, and you know, I never would as Rosalie, but somehow I could do that. You know, the book, you know, so. But one thing it said to me was, it made me feel. He made me feel in sharing his story, I was very much a part of the Baba group. I don't always feel that, but his story was something so inclusive about it. And I thought, and even that part where he got to sleep in the blue bus, I have to show you my blue bus.
Oh.
I just thought, what a privilege on Baba's bed in the blue bus. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? I don't know, but all I could say is there was something about his story was vast.
Yeah.
You know, it just went on, and it was just all inclusive. Is all I could say about it. So I was grateful for knowing him and knowing you, Alisa. You know. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, Rosalie. We
Yeah.
could go on and on. There are so many people that haven't shared that I know loved Robert and would love to share. I wish we had another hour.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to have to just say Jai Baba for now and maybe have a moment of silence together in memory of Baba's love for Robert Dreyfuss and his for Baba.
Baba. Thank you.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Meher Baba.
Ki Jai.
Avatar Meher Baba.
Baba.
Ki Jai.
Avatar
Avatar Meher
Baba.
Baba. Ki
Jai.
Jai Baba.